January 14th, 2026, 11:47 p.m. local time. The southern approach to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The MV Atlantic Fortuna, a Liberian-flagged bulk carrier, 190 meters long, loaded with 42,000 tons of Indonesian nickel ore, is making 12 knots through one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. 23 crew members on board. Filipino, Indian, Ukrainian. A routine transit they've done 9 times in the past 2 years. 60 nautical miles to the northwest, the USS Wasp sits in the middle of the Red Sea, an amphibious assault ship. 40,000 tons of American military power. 840 Marines from the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit embarked. 24 aircraft on her flight deck. And a force reconnaissance platoon that has spent the last 4 months training for exactly one thing: boarding operations at night against armed hostiles in confined maritime spaces. They had rehearsed the scenario 17 times during this deployment alone. Tonight, they won't be rehearsing. I'm your host at Navy Powerline, where we break down the most critical naval operations shaping global power. What happened over the next 3 hours and 41 minutes in the southern Red Sea would validate years of doctrine, months of training, and 11 minutes of violence so precise it barely left a mark on the ship itself. But it left 6 pirates dead on the deck plates. Let's start with the ship. The MV Atlantic Fortuna is what the maritime industry calls a Handymax bulk carrier, built in 2019 at a shipyard in Dalian, China. Operated by Polaris Maritime, a Greek shipping company with offices in Piraeus. She carries a standard crew rotation: Captain Andrei Zelenko, Ukrainian, 46 years old, 19 years at sea. Chief Engineer Rajesh Patel, Indian, running the engine room with a team of 4. The rest of the crew split between deck operations, navigation, and galley. 23 souls total. On the night of January 14th, the Fortuna was transiting southbound through the Bab el-Mandeb. She had departed Jeddah 2 days earlier, heading for the Suez Canal approach in reverse, down through the Red Sea, around the Horn of Africa, and east toward Singapore. The captain had chosen to make the Strait Passage at night. Standard practice. Most commercial masters prefer darkness for this stretch. The logic is simple. Smaller boats are harder to launch and coordinate at night. Pirate skiffs rely on visual acquisition of targets. That logic held for years. It didn't hold tonight. At 11:52 p.m., the bridge watch officer, Second Officer Danilo Reyes, 28 from Cebu, noticed 2 contacts on the commercial radar. Small returns, moving fast, bearing 045 northeast of the ship's position, roughly 4 nautical miles out. Speed, 22 knots. Reyes watched them for 90 seconds. Both contacts held course directly toward the Fortuna. He called the captain. Captain Zelenko reached the bridge at 11:54 p.m. He looked at the radar. The contacts were now at 3 nautical miles, still closing, still fast. He picked up the radio and attempted contact on VHF Channel 16, the international distress and calling frequency. No response. He tried again on Channel 13. Nothing. At 11:56 p.m., the contacts split. One moved to the port side. The other swung wide to starboard. Classic pincer approach. Textbook piracy boarding formation. Zelenko hit the ship security alert system button. A silent alarm hardwired into the bridge console that transmits a distress signal via satellite directly to the ship's flag state authority and to the nearest Naval Coordination Center. In this case, that signal went to the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Office in Dubai, which relayed it immediately to Combined Maritime Forces Headquarters in Bahrain, the nerve center of NAVCENT, the U.S. Naval Forces Central Command. That signal hit Bahrain at 11:57 p.m. The clock was now running. On the water, the 2 skiffs closed fast. They were fiberglass-hulled boats approximately 8 meters long, powered by twin outboard engines. Each carried 3 men. The pirates were armed with AK-47 assault rifles, and at least one RPG-7 launcher was visible in the lead boat. According to after-action assessments compiled weeks later, the group had links to a coastal militia network operating out of the Yemeni port town of Mocha. Not Somali pirates in the traditional sense, but a more organized, better-equipped cell that had been active in the southern Red Sea since late 2025. They reached the Fortuna at 12:01 a.m. on January 15th. The first skiff hooked onto the portside midships using a telescoping boarding ladder, an aluminum pole with a grappling hook welded to the top. 3 men climbed aboard in under 40 seconds. The second skiff came alongside the starboard quarter. 3 more men boarded from there. 6 armed men on the ship in less than 2 minutes. Captain Zelenko ordered the crew to the Citadel, a reinforced safe room located deep inside the ship's superstructure, standard on modern commercial vessels transiting high-risk areas. But the pirates moved faster than anyone expected. 2 of them reached the bridge within 3 minutes. They fired a burst from an AK-47 into the overhead. Not aimed at anyone, just noise. Intimidation. Zelenko and Reyes were seized on the bridge. The remaining pirates swept deck by deck. Within 8 minutes, they had rounded up 19 of the 23 crew members. 4 managed to lock themselves inside the engine control room, a secondary hardened space below the waterline. But the pirates didn't bother forcing entry. They had enough hostages. 19 men were herded into the main engine room, hands zip-tied, forced to sit on the deck plates between the ship's 2 MAN-B and W diesel engines. The heat was oppressive. Ambient temperature in an operating engine room runs between 40 and 50 degrees Celsius. One crew member, a Filipino able seaman named Marco Villanueva, had been struck in the face with a rifle butt during the roundup. His left cheekbone was fractured. A second crew member, the ship's cook, had fallen down a ladder well while being moved and suffered a broken wrist. A third man, the bosun, had a laceration on his scalp from a glancing blow. 3 injured hostages. 19 total in captivity. 4 hiding in the engine control room. 6 pirates in control of a 190-meter merchant vessel carrying 42,000 tons of cargo. At 12:09 a.m., the pirate leader, identified in subsequent intelligence reports only by his call sign, Saeed, made a satellite phone call from the bridge. The call went to a number in Sana'a. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. According to communications intercepts analyzed after the operation, Saeed demanded $12 million for the release of the crew and the ship. $12 million. For a bulk carrier worth maybe $35 million on a good day. The person on the other end of the call told Saeed to wait. Someone would call back within 6 hours. Saeed posted 2 lookouts on the bridge wings, 1 port, 1 starboard. He positioned 1 man at the top of the superstructure with the RPG. The remaining 2 stayed in the engine room guarding the hostages. Saeed himself stayed on the bridge. He thought he had time. He was wrong. 60 nautical miles to the northwest, aboard the USS Wasp, the situation was already moving at a speed Saeed couldn't imagine. The Wasp, hull designation LHD-1, is the lead ship of her class. Commissioned in 1989, she has been upgraded repeatedly and remains one of the most versatile warships in the United States Navy. Displacement: 40,500 tons full load. Length: 253 meters. Crew: over 1,000 sailors and 800 embarked Marines. Her flight deck can operate AV-8B Harrier jump jets, MV-22 Osprey tiltrotors, CH-53E Super Stallion heavy lift helicopters, AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters, and UH-1Y Venom utility helicopters. She carries 4 landing craft air cushion hovercraft in her well deck. She has a full combat hospital. She has a brig. She has everything a Marine Expeditionary Unit needs to project force anywhere within helicopter range. And helicopter range for the CH-53E is over 500 nautical miles. The SSAS alert from the Fortuna was received at NavCent headquarters at 11:57 p.m. By 12:04 a.m., 7 minutes later, the information had been routed to the WASP's Combat Information Center. The ship's commanding officer, Captain Rebecca Torres, was woken at 12:06 a.m. By 12:11 a.m., Torres was in CIC reviewing the situation. She had 3 pieces of information: a silent alarm from a merchant vessel in the Bab el-Mandeb, radar tracks showing the vessel had stopped making way, and an intercept, courtesy of a P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft operating out of Djibouti, of a satellite phone call originating from the ship's position. Hostage situation. Armed pirates. 19 crew members at risk. Torres made 1 phone call to Rear Admiral James Whitfield, commander of Task Force 51, aboard the USS Baton further north in the Red Sea. Whitfield authorized the rescue at 12:18 a.m. The entire chain of command, from alert to authorization, took 21 minutes. The Marines had been waiting longer than that to get dressed. I spent hours going through the tactical framework that governs these kinds of operations, and one detail kept nagging me: how fast the decision loop closed. 21 minutes from a silent alarm on a foreign-flagged merchant vessel to a go order for a hostage rescue. In most military bureaucracies, that decision takes days. In some, it never comes at all. The 26th MEU had pre-delegated authority for exactly this contingency. The doctrine existed. The rehearsals existed. The only thing that was new was the ship. In the WASP's marine berthing spaces, the Force Reconnaissance Platoon was already moving. These are not standard infantry Marines. Force Recon is the Marine Corps' deep reconnaissance and direct action element. Operators trained in military freefall parachuting, combatant diving, close-quarters battle, and amphibious reconnaissance. The platoon embarked on the WASP consisted of 24 Marines, led by First Lieutenant Carlos Garza, 27 years old, on his second MEU deployment. Garza had his team assembled by 12:20 a.m. By 12:35 a.m., the full operations order had been briefed. The plan was straightforward. 2 axes of assault, simultaneous entry. Axis 1. 2 CH-53E Super Stallion helicopters would insert the main assault element, 16 Marines, onto the Fortuna's aft deck. The CH-53E is the heaviest helicopter in the Western military inventory. 3 engines, maximum takeoff weight, 33,000 kilograms. It can carry 37 combat-loaded Marines. For this mission, each bird would carry 8 operators plus a 2-man helicopter crew. The insertion would be via fast rope, Marines sliding down thick braided ropes from the hovering helicopter directly onto the ship's deck. Time on target, less than 15 seconds per aircraft. Axis 2. A rigid hull inflatable boat team, 8 Marines, would approach from the waterline on the port side. The RHIB would launch from the WASP's well deck, make the 60 nautical mile transit at 35 knots, and arrive at the Fortuna simultaneously with the helicopter element. The RHIB team would scale the hull using caving ladders, lightweight aluminum ladders that hook over a ship's rail, and enter the superstructure from the main deck level. Timing was everything. Both elements had to arrive within 30 seconds of each other. If the helicopter team hit the ship first and the pirates heard them, they'd have time to execute hostages before the RHIB team could reach the engine room. If the RHIB team went first and was spotted, the helicopter approach would face RPG fire from the superstructure, simultaneous, or not at all. But there was a problem. The RHIB transit from the WASP to the Fortuna would take roughly 1 hour and 45 minutes at maximum sustainable speed. The helicopters could cover the same distance in under 40 minutes. That meant the RHIB had to launch first, almost 70 minutes before the helicopters. If the pirates changed position during that window, the plan would need to be adjusted in real time, in the dark, at sea. Subscribe if you want to see how the Navy responds to threats like this. At 12:42 a.m., the RHIB launched from the Wasp's well deck. 8 Marines in full combat kit. Night vision goggles, suppressed M4A1 carbines, SIG Sauer M, 18 sidearms, flashbang grenades, breaching charges, and flex cuffs. Each man carried a personal medical kit with tourniquets and hemostatic gauze. Their boat was a Mark V Special Operations Craft derivative. A 7-meter rigid hull inflatable with twin 200-horsepower outboards, painted matte gray, virtually invisible on radar at sea level. The boat disappeared into the darkness heading southeast. Aboard the Wasp, the 2 CH-53ES were being prepared on the flight deck. Ground crews worked under red light conditions. No white light, no unnecessary radio transmissions. The helicopters were configured for assault operations. External auxiliary fuel tanks removed to reduce radar cross-section. Cabin doors locked open for fast rope deployment. Infrared navigation lights only. At 1:15 a.m., a P-8A Poseidon, callsign Trident 4-1, established an orbit at 25,000 feet above the Fortuna's position. The P-8A is a military derivative of the Boeing 737-800, packed with sensors. AN/APS-149 littoral surveillance radar system, an electro-optical/infrared turret, electronic surveillance measures, and a communications relay suite. From 5 miles up, the Poseidon's crew could count the pirates on deck. They reported 6 individuals total, 2 on the bridge wings, 1 on top of the superstructure near what appeared to be a shoulder-launched weapon system, 1 moving between the bridge and the crew mess, 2 stationary in what the thermal imagery suggested was the engine room. Heat signatures partially obscured by the engine block returns but consistent with armed individuals standing over a group of seated persons. 19 heat signatures on the deck. Hostages confirmed. The Poseidon also provided something critical, a real-time picture of the Fortuna's radar emissions. The ship's commercial navigation radar was still operating. It was a Furuno FR 8065, a standard X-band set with a range of about 24 nautical miles in optimal conditions. The radar was sweeping in standard rotation. Nobody on the bridge was actively monitoring it. The 2 lookouts were using their eyes, not the screen. This told the assault planners 2 things. First, the pirates were not sophisticated enough to use the ship's own sensors for defense. Second, the CH-53ES would need to approach from a vector that placed them inside the ship's own radar shadow, the blind spot created by the vessel's superstructure blocking its own radar beam. The approach vector was calculated. From the east, directly astern, using the ship's bridge structure as a physical mask. The helicopters would fly at 50 feet above the water, below the effective detection altitude of the Furuno radar, and approach from the Fortuna's 6 o'clock, where the superstructure would block any radar return until they were less than 200 meters from the ship. At that point, it wouldn't matter if the radar saw them. They'd be on the deck in 20 seconds. What struck me about this operation is how little was left to chance. Every variable, the radar shadow, the thermal imagery, the approach vector, the synchronized timing, had been calculated, rehearsed, and recalculated. This wasn't a commando raid dreamed up on a whiteboard. This was industrial-grade military planning applied to a problem that most people associate with Hollywood movies. The gap between what the public imagines a hostage rescue looks like and what actually goes into one is measured in thousands of hours of preparation. At 1:48 a.m., the RHIB team reported their position, 15 nautical miles southeast of the Fortuna, making 32 knots on schedule. Sea state was calm. 1-foot swells, wind from the northeast at 6 knots. Visibility was poor by human standards, no moon, heavy overcast. but through AN/PVS-31A binocular night vision goggles, the Marines could see the ocean surface in crisp green detail out to several hundred meters. At 2:05 a.m., the two CH-53Es lifted off from the Wasp's flight deck. Call signs: Rhino 6-1 and Rhino 6-2. They climbed to 200 feet, turned southeast, and accelerated to 140 knots. Flight time to target, 38 minutes. At 2:14 a.m., the RHIB team reported they had visual on the Fortuna. The ship was dead in the water, all navigation lights extinguished except for a single white light on the bridge, probably the pirate's own flashlight. No movement visible on the main deck. The RHIB cut engines to idle and began a low-speed approach from the port quarter, making less than 5 knots, the electric trolling motor engaged for the final 300 meters. Here's something that doesn't make sense on the surface. 6 men with rifles and an RPG sitting on a stationary ship in the middle of a maritime corridor patrolled by the most powerful navy in the history of the world, and they apparently believed they had the upper hand. They believed the ransom call would work. They believed they had time. The psychology is almost incomprehensible until you realize that for the previous 3 months, similar groups had boarded 4 other vessels in this corridor and collected ransoms on 2 of them without any military intervention. They had evidence that the system worked. What they didn't have was evidence that the 26th MEU was within helicopter range. At 2:28 a.m., the RHIB reached the Fortuna's hull. Dead, silent. The coxswain held the boat against the portside midships, using the ship's own waterline curvature to shield the RHIB from anyone looking down from the bridge wings. 2 Marines attached the caving ladder, a 4-meter aluminum and cable ladder with rubberized hooks, to the ship's rail. No sound. The rubber coating on the hooks prevented any metal-on-metal contact. The 8 Marines waited, weapons ready, eyes on the deck edge above them. They did not board yet. The order was, wait for Rhino. At 2:30 a.m., Rhino 6-1 and Rhino 6-2 were 12 nautical miles east of the Fortuna, descending through 100 feet. They dropped to 50 feet above the water. Speed reduced to 80 knots. The pilots switched to terrain-following mode, which over open water meant holding altitude by radar altimeter while navigating purely by infrared and GPS. The helicopters approached from directly astern, exactly as planned. The Fortuna's bridge superstructure loomed ahead on infrared, a warm block against the cool ocean surface. The pilots adjusted their approach angle to keep the superstructure between themselves and the bridge windows. At 2:31 a.m., the Poseidon crew reported no change on deck. 2 lookouts on bridge wings, both facing forward and to the sides, neither looking aft. The man with the RPG on the superstructure roof was sitting down, weapon across his lap. At 2:33 a.m., Rhino 6-1 entered the radar shadow zone, 200 meters from the Fortuna's stern, 50 feet above the water, closing at 60 knots. The lookout on the port bridge wing did not react. The lookout on the starboard bridge wing did not turn around. At 2:34 a.m., Rhino 6-1 flared over the Fortuna's aft deck. The rotor wash hit the ship like a sudden storm. Loose rigging snapped, cargo covers fluttered, a coil of mooring line blew across the deck. The noise was enormous. The CH-53E's 3 General Electric T-64 GE-416A turboshaft engines produce 13,140 shaft horsepower combined. At 50 feet hover, the sound isn't just loud, it's physical. You feel it in your chest. 4 fast ropes dropped from the cabin door. 8 Marines descended in 4.7 seconds. Boots hit the deck. 11 seconds later, Rhino 6-2 was in position. 8 more Marines on the deck. Total time, 17 seconds for 16 operators to be on the ship. Simultaneously, within 8 seconds of the first helicopter's arrival, the RHIB team began their climb. 8 Marines went up the caving ladder on the port side. The first man over the rail at 2:34 and 20 seconds, 24 Marines. On the ship, from 2 directions, in less than 30 seconds. The assault clock started at 2:34 a.m. On the bridge, the 2 lookouts reacted, but too slowly. The portside lookout turned toward the aft deck, saw nothing in the darkness. His night vision was destroyed by the flashlight he'd been using inside, and raised his rifle. He didn't fire. A 4-man fire team from the helicopter element was already inside the superstructure, moving up the internal stairwell toward the bridge. They reached the bridge level at 2:35 a.m. The entry was textbook. 2 flashbang grenades through the bridge door, M84 stun grenades producing 170 decibels and 1,000,000 candela of light. The concussive blast in the enclosed bridge space was disorienting beyond recovery. Both lookouts and Saeed, who had been sitting in the captain's chair, were incapacitated for the 6 seconds it took the fire team to enter, identify threats, and engage. 3 shots, suppressed. 2 lookouts neutralized. Saeed attempted to raise a pistol, a Makarov PM, Soviet era, later recovered with a full magazine, and was hit twice in the chest at a range of 4 meters. He fell behind the helm console. Bridge secured, 3 hostiles down. Elapsed time from first boot on deck, 58 seconds. One detail that stuck with me from the operational summary. The Marines' rifles were loaded with 77-grain open-tip match ammunition. Not standard ball. This is precision ammunition designed for exactly this kind of engagement. Close range, high accuracy, reduced risk of overpenetration through bulkheads that might hit hostages on the other side of a wall. Someone had thought about the ammunition choice months before this night. On the superstructure roof, the pirate with the RPG-7 heard the flashbangs. He stood up, shouldered the launcher, and aimed it at the nearest helicopter, Rhino 6-2, which was pulling away after offloading its Marines. The RPG-7 has an effective range of approximately 300 meters against moving targets. Rhino 6-2 was already 250 meters away and accelerating. He never fired. A Marine sniper positioned on the ship's funnel catwalk, he had climbed there from the aft deck in the first 20 seconds, put a single round from an M110A1 semi-automatic sniper system into the pirate's upper torso. The 6.5mm Creedmoor round traveled 62 meters. The pirate dropped the RPG and collapsed. The launcher clattered down the superstructure's exterior ladder and came to rest on the boat deck. 4th hostile down. Elapsed time, 2 minutes, 11 seconds. Now the hardest part, the engine room. 16 Marines were moving through the superstructure, clearing every compartment. The remaining 8 from the RHIB team were advancing through the main deck toward the engine room access. The Fortuna's engine room is located amidships, below the waterline, accessible by 2 routes, a main stairwell from the superstructure, and a lower access trunk from the cargo hold level. 2 pirates were in that engine room with 19 hostages. This is the part that'll probably get some pushback. The most dangerous moment in any maritime hostage rescue isn't the initial boarding. It's the last 60 seconds before you reach the hostages. Because the men guarding those hostages know, by now, that the ship has been boarded. They've heard the helicopters. They've heard the flashbangs. They've heard the shooting. They know their friends on the bridge are dead. And they have 19 human beings sitting on the floor in front of them with their hands tied. The calculation those 2 men make in that moment determines whether this is a rescue or a massacre. The RHIB team reached the lower engine room access trunk at 2:38 a.m. The main stairwell team was in position 1 deck above the engine room at the same time. Both teams reported ready. First Lieutenant Garza, commanding from the bridge, which was now secure, gave the order. Both teams entered simultaneously. The lower trunk team used a breaching charge, a strip charge placed on the engine room door's hinges. The detonation blew the door inward. 2 flashbangs followed before the door hit the deck. The engine room of a Handymax bulk carrier is not a large space, but it's cluttered. Pipes, catwalks, valve manifolds, the massive engine blocks themselves. Visibility is limited. The noise from the ventilation systems and auxiliary generators is constant, even with the main engine stopped. Thermal imaging was useless. Everything in the engine room radiates heat. The Marines went in with white light, weapon-mounted Surefire lights at 1,000 lumens, cutting through the industrial haze. The first pirate was crouched behind a pump manifold, AK-47 raised. He fired 3 rounds. All 3 hit the steel bulkhead to the left of the entry point. None hit a Marine. Return fire was immediate. 2 Marines engaged simultaneously, putting 7 rounds into the pirate's position. He went down. The second pirate was at the far end of the engine room, near the hostages. He had his rifle pointed at the group of crew members on the floor. This is the moment the entire operation hinged on. He hesitated. 1 second, maybe 2. Long enough for a Marine from the stairwell team, entering from the upper catwalk, to acquire him from an elevated angle. 1 shot, center mass. The pirate dropped his weapon and fell sideways into a fuel line bracket. 6th hostile neutralized. All 6 pirates confirmed down. Elapsed time from first boot on deck, 11 minutes. The hostages were alive. All 19. The 3 who had been injured during the initial pirate boarding were conscious but in pain. Villanueva's facial fracture needed stabilization. The cook's broken wrist was splinted on sight. The bosun's scalp wound was pressure bandaged. A Navy corpsman embedded with the Marine platoon began triage at 2:46 a.m. The 4 crew members locked in the engine control room were contacted by radio and confirmed safe. They emerged at 2:51 a.m. 23 crew members. All alive. All accounted for. Put yourself in Captain Zelenko's position for a moment. Sitting on that bridge with a gun to your head at midnight, watching pirates take your crew, believing you might not survive the night. And then, 2.5 hours later, Marines walk through the door, and it's over. 11 minutes of controlled violence, and every single person under your command is going home. At 3:02 a.m., Captain Torres aboard the USS Wasp received the message. Jackpot. All hostages recovered. All threats neutralized. 0 friendly casualties. 0 friendly casualties. Not a scratch on a Marine. The Fortuna herself sustained minimal damage. Bullet holes in 2 bulkheads, a blown door in the engine room trunk, minor shrapnel damage to the bridge console from the flashbangs. The ship's mechanical systems were unaffected. Within 12 hours, a skeleton crew from the Wasp brought the Fortuna's engines back online, and the vessel was escorted to Djibouti under her own power. The 6 pirates were confirmed killed in action. Their 2 skiffs were located adrift approximately 1 nautical mile from the Fortuna's position and were sunk by gunfire from the Wasp's escort destroyer, the USS Gravely, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, hull number DDG-107. Each skiff took less than 30 seconds to sink after the Gravely's 25mm Bushmaster chain gun put a burst through their hulls at 400 meters. What do you think? Should navies be doing more of these direct interventions? Or does the risk to hostages make negotiation the better path? It's not as clear-cut as it looks after a successful rescue. In the aftermath, the operation was briefed to CENTCOM Commander General Michael Kurilla and to the Secretary of Defense. Satellite imagery confirmed the coastal launch point of the pirate skiffs, a small inlet 12 nautical miles north of Mocha, Yemen. Declassified reports later revealed that the inlet had been under surveillance by a U.S. Navy MQ-9 Reaper drone for 6 weeks prior to the incident. But no preemptive action had been authorized because the group had not yet committed an act of piracy. They committed one. It was their last. Sources familiar with the operation described the rescue as a near-textbook execution of the Marine Corps' tactical recovery of aircraft and personnel doctrine. Adapted for maritime hostage rescue, but built on the same principles: speed, violence of action, surprise, simultaneous entry from multiple axes, overwhelming force applied to a narrow point. Captain Torres's after-action report, portions of which were later shared with maritime industry security briefings, contained one line that was repeated in every subsequent account of the operation. She wrote, "The 26th MEU rehearsed this scenario 17 times during our deployment. We were told it would probably never happen. It happened. The doctrine worked. 17 rehearsals, 1 real-world execution, 23 lives saved, 11 minutes." The MV Atlantic Fortuna arrived in Djibouti on January 16th. Her crew was medically evaluated at Camp Lemonnier, the only permanent U.S. military base in Africa, home to Combined Joint Task Force Horn of Africa. The 3 injured crew members were treated at the base hospital and released within 48 hours. Captain Zelenko gave a brief statement to the ship's operating company, thanking the U.S. Marines. He did not speak to the press. The USS Wasp continued her deployment in the Red Sea. The 26th MEU conducted 3 more training exercises before returning to Naval Station Norfolk in March 2026. No additional piracy incidents were reported in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait for the remainder of the MEU's deployment. The question people keep asking isn't whether the Marines could pull off a hostage rescue at sea. They've done it repeatedly across decades of operations. The harder question is why this particular group of pirates, organized, well-armed, operating in a corridor they knew was patrolled, believed they could get away with it. The answer is probably simple. They had gotten away with it before. Twice in the previous 3 months, similar groups had boarded vessels and collected ransoms without military intervention. The shipping companies paid. The insurers absorbed the cost, and the pirates learned that the Red Sea was open for business. January 14, 2026, was the night that lesson was corrected. Will this kind of operation become more common in the Red Sea? Comment yes or no, because the threat environment isn't getting simpler. 6 men boarded a merchant ship with rifles and a rocket launcher, seized 19 hostages, and called in a $12 million ransom demand. They believed the math was on their side. They believed the world would negotiate. Instead, 24 Marines fast-roped onto their deck at 2:34 in the morning, cleared the ship in 11 minutes, and didn't lose a single man. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait is 18 miles wide. It carries 12% of global maritime trade. Every day, dozens of vessels transit through those waters. Tankers, container ships, bulk carriers, moving billions of dollars in cargo between Asia, Europe, and Africa. Those ships sail under the protection of the United States Navy and the United States Marine Corps. What happened to the Atlantic Fortuna is what happens when that protection is tested. The outcome was never in doubt. Comment launch if you think the Marines made the right call going in at night instead of waiting for daylight negotiations. Subscribe to Navy Powerline for the most detailed breakdowns of modern naval operations and military power. Every week, we cover the operations that define who controls the seas. The 6 men who boarded the MV Atlantic Fortuna at 12:01 a.m. on January 15, 2026, made one assumption: that the darkness would protect them. They didn't know that the darkness belonged to the Marines.